All right, we've got a real head-scratcher for you today. We're going to look at three countries right next to each other in Southeast Asia: Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Now, you think since they share a ton of cultural and ethnic history, they'd be pretty similar in a lot of ways. But when you look at their average IQ scores, there's this massive, kind of shocking gap. So what's going on here?
Okay, so let's get right into it. Take a look at these numbers, because this is what kicks off the whole mystery. Singapore's average IQ is sitting pretty at around 103. Then you've got Malaysia at about 97, and Indonesia comes in just under 92. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but trust me, in the world of intelligence testing, that is a huge difference. It's like a staircase, right? Each country is a big step down from the next.
So, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How can you have this nearly 12-point gap between people who are, for all intents and purposes, so similar? It's a real puzzle. And at first glance, you might think it points to one thing, but as we're about to find out, the real clues lead us down a totally different path.
All right, so before we start pointing fingers or jumping to conclusions, we've got to do what any good detective would do. We have to question the evidence. In this case, the evidence is the IQ score itself. So, what is an IQ score? Like, what are we actually measuring here?
Well, if you look it up in a textbook, it sounds super simple. The intelligence quotient, or IQ, is just supposed to be the standard test score that measures how smart you are. One simple number that tells you everything you need to know about someone's brain power. Easy, right?
Well, not so fast. Here's where it gets interesting. A lot of experts are now saying that this one little number doesn't even come close to telling the whole story. I love this one quote that says, IQ isn't intelligence itself, it's just a snapshot in a scrapbook of smarts. Think about that. It's just one picture on one day, influenced by a million different things. It's not some permanent, unchangeable score of how smart you were born.
So right off the bat, our main piece of evidence, the IQ test, has some major problems. For starters, these tests were mostly created in what scientists call weird societies. And yeah, it's an acronym: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. This means the questions themselves can be culturally biased. And here's the real kicker. The scores seem to line up suspiciously well with who has access to good schools and resources. In fact, most experts will tell you that education is the #1 reason you see these big differences in scores across different countries.
Okay, so if the test isn't really measuring some pure innate brain power, then maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Let's follow the clues somewhere else. Let's investigate the environment. What's life actually like in these countries? What kind of opportunities do people have?
And wow, when you start looking at the environment, the differences are just staggering. I mean, just look at this. GDP per capita, that's the average income, is over $70,000 in Singapore, and it's down around $5,000 in Indonesia. That's a world of difference. Or check out the PISA math scores, a big international test. Singapore is at the very top, while Malaysia and Indonesia are, really struggling. These aren't just stats on a chart. This is the reality of daily life. We're talking huge gaps in money, schools, and even just getting online.
Let's zoom in for a second, just on Singapore and Malaysia. They're right next door to each other. But after they became independent, they went in completely different directions. Singapore went all in on what some people call a ruthless hyper-meritocracy, basically an ultra-competitive system where academic and economic success was everything. Malaysia, they went a different route, putting in place a huge affirmative action program for the majority population. So you've got two totally different game plans, which created two totally different sets of opportunities for the people living there.
So you've got all these clues piling up, right? All pointing towards the environment. And that's when this one really groundbreaking study came along and decided to put this theory to the test. They crunched the numbers in a way nobody had before, and what they found was a total breakthrough.
The researchers started with this really simple but powerful question. What if this gap has nothing to do with genetics at all? What if it's all about opportunity? What would happen, they wondered, if we could statistically even the playing field? If we could account for all those differences in education and wealth? Would that mysterious IQ gap just go away?
So, here's what they did. They got the raw IQ scores from more than 2,400 teenagers of the same ethnic background, Malay, across 4 different countries. And yep, at first, the results showed exactly what we saw before, that same staircase pattern, with Singapore at the top and Indonesia at the bottom. The puzzle was still there.
But then came the magic trick. They statistically adjusted the scores. They controlled for just 3 things, 3 key opportunity factors. First, how educated the students' parents were. Second, the average internet speed they had access to. And third, how many hours of private tutoring they got every week. Things that are wildly different from one country to the next.
And get this. This is the big reveal. On the left, you see the original scores, that big staircase. On the right, you see the scores after they adjusted for those 3 opportunity factors. And just like that, the gap collapses. It's gone. Everybody from Singapore to Indonesia is suddenly clustered right around the same score. The whole hierarchy just vanishes into thin air.
How much of the gap vanished? A stunning 82%. 82% of that huge difference between the countries just disappeared. It was never really about raw intelligence in the first place. It was an illusion created by a massive difference in resources and access to things like good schools and fast internet.
So, I think we can say, case closed. We've examined the evidence, we've followed the clues, and the data points to one single, unavoidable conclusion.
It turns out we haven't been measuring an intelligence quotient at all. We've been measuring an opportunity quotient. These scores say way less about the horsepower of someone's brain and way more about whether they grew up with a solid internet connection, went to a good school, or could get a tutor if they needed one.
There's this quote from the study that just nails it perfectly. It says, "Stop calling your cousin in Batam less intelligent. Call him under-broadbanded." And that just reframes the whole thing, doesn't it? It's not about how smart someone is, it's about the system they live in. It's not about what's inside you, it's about what you have access to.
And all this leaves us with a much bigger and, frankly, a much more important question to think about. Maybe the right question isn't who's smarter. Maybe the real question we should be asking is, how do we build a world where everyone gets a real shot? A world that creates opportunity for all. That is the mystery that's actually worth solving.